Give it a moment just to start the actual live stream. All right, we are live.
All right, great. Well, welcome, folks, and thank you for joining the Puget Sound Energy Resource Planning Advisory Group information session. We're going to get started here in 2 minutes, right at 11 o'clock. So thanks for your patience, and we're excited to be having all of you with us today. All right, folks.
Hi, Annie.
Hello. I don't know why I'm echoing. Does that work? Okay, great. That didn't happen before. Can you hear me okay, Ezra? Since I
I
already
can
heard you
hear you.
once.
No echo
Okay.
here.
Okay, perfect. Great. Thank you. All right. Well, it's 11 o'clock, so let's go ahead and get started. Hello, everyone, and welcome to Puget Sound Energy's Resource Planning Advisory Group, or as we refer to it, the RPAG information session. I'm Annie Kilberg-Smith with Triangle Associates, and I'm going to be facilitating our session in coordination with our guest consultant, Guidehouse, as well as Puget Sound Energy. So thank you so much for being here, whether you're joining us as a member, a presenter, or from the public via the live stream. We really greatly appreciate your time and taking this time out of your day to be here with us over the next hour. So today's meeting purpose is really for the consultant Guidehouse as well as PSE to introduce and present some updated electric vehicle forecasting results and gather input from the advisory group to inform PSE's integrated system planning efforts. You can go to the next slide. But before we dive in, wanted to go through some of your Zoom controls. So either at the top or bottom of your screen, depending on what type of device you're using, that's where the RPAG members will see things like raise hand, which we want you to use when you have a question or you want to get in the queue. There's also the mute unmute and the chat box, which as a reminder, please make sure that if you'd like your chat sent to everyone, that you push the drop down and select everyone rather than just hosts and panelists. That makes it available to all the public that are also attending today, which I think we might have a few. And then there's also the opportunity for captions and translating captions as well as reactions. So if you want to give us a thumbs up, raise your hand, you click on that, and then you can go to the various reactions. We love getting those throughout the meeting to know that folks are engaging and interacting with each other. If anything's hiding, just go ahead and move your mouse to the top of your screen and they should, or the bottom of your screen, and they should pop up. Note that the Q&A tool is not going to be used today. We'll just be using the chat. It's a little bit easier to have all Q&A in one place. So that's where we'll be focusing folks. And then a quick reminder that this is a webinar format, so you're not going to be able to see the public observers unless they provide public comment at the end of this meeting. This is really intended for the RPAG members to provide direct input and gather together with PSE and Guidehouse today. So if you're having any technical trouble, please feel free to reach out to my colleague, Ben Relampagos, and you can directly chat with him on the chat function. You can just hold that arrow down again and choose Ben if you need help. Next slide. So few quick facilitator requests to help us get things moving. We're just aiming to have some real constructive and courteous dialogue with each other and just asking you all to trust me to get us through the conversation together. I know this is going to be a quick hour and want to make sure we can get to as many questions as possible. We do ask that you try to avoid acronyms at least the first time you say it so that people know what you're referring to. And same goes for technical questions. If you can say those out or spell them out verbally before you start using those acronyms, that's super helpful. And if you've got anything to share out of today's topic, so if it's not focused on what we're talking about today, please feel free to use the feedback form or email isp@pse.com and we can put those in the chat for you. A heads up that the public comment will come after the presentation and question and answer, so note that we'll make space for that towards the end of the meeting. Next slide. And as always, we have a safety moment for today. And as we head into summer travel season, want a quick reminder to stay safe on the road. So make sure you check your tires for wear and proper pressure before heading out. Want to make sure that you plan your route in advance and be aware of traffic conditions. Give yourself some extra time so you're not tempted to rush. Make sure you're well rested before driving. And of course, keep your phone away from you while you're driving to make sure you're staying safe. So we want to make sure you're getting safely to all those camping trips, hiking, and wherever you plan to head this summer. All right, next slide. We actually don't have PSE's introduction presenter here, which will be Lauren Mollender, and she will be providing an introduction to Will with Guidehouse to provide some stage setting for the conversation today. So once we get to that section, she'll provide that introduction and set the context for you all, and then we'll dive into the main presentation. We've got lots of slides if needed, but mainly we're going to be taking folks through the executive summary and then allowing all those other slides as resources as needed. So in addition to our speakers, we also have other PSC colleagues here and the RPAG members as well. And it would be great if you wouldn't mind introducing yourselves in the chat with your name, who you represent, and what you're looking for out of today's information session. That'd be super helpful. Another thing that's really good to see is if you haven't done so already, if you don't mind updating your name by clicking on the three dots to the right of your name with a organization or affiliation after name, just so other folks that may not be familiar with you or haven't met you before know who you're with. Okay, so we'd love to see those introductions waterfall in. And with that, you can go to the next slide. So here's our plan for the next hour. Lauren from PSE will provide that context to introduce Will, and then Will take us through Puget Sound Energy's fiscal year 2025 electric vehicle forecast and results. Then we're going to wrap up with public comment. And if you have to jump early, no worries. We're going to be sending out materials and the recording afterwards. As a reminder for the public comment portion, we will be providing 3 minutes per person, and it's going to be a tight hour together. So we will have to be rather strict about that if we have several people commenting. Okay, any questions about the agenda before we dive in? Okay.
Annie,
Next,
this is Will. Should
yes.
I, for the presentation, should I take questions as they arise, or should we wait?
Yeah, great question. Yeah, so if you want to go to the next slide, what we're going to do is, so this group is really used to just asking questions as we go. So we want to hear the RPAG's questions, their reflections, their comments on today's presentation, but no, Will and Lauren, I'm going to be facilitating all that, so you don't need to be tracking it at all. I'll be tracking it in the chat. I'll be tracking it by people raising their hands, and I'll get them in the queue, and I'll call on them and say the questions out loud as we go through them. So you don't have to worry about tracking that. I can take care of that.
Okay, I'll probably stop like after a slide to give you time and not just rush through.
That sounds great. Yeah. So yeah, RPAG members, please go ahead and raise your hand or put your questions in the chat or take yourself off mute if you're on the phone and just say, hey, Annie, I have a question I'd like to get in the queue, and then we'll make sure to get to as many as we can. I anticipate there probably will be a lot of conversation today. So if we don't get to everything, please know that it will be included in the feedback report since we just have the hour together. Okay, so with that, I'm going to go ahead and move over to Lauren with PSE to provide that context setting, who's going to be introducing Will for the presentation. So Lauren, over to you.
Great. Thank you, Annie. As Annie said, I'm Lauren Molander, and I am the manager of PSE's Load Forecasting and Analysis Group. If you've been with us for a while, you'll recall that we partner with Guidehouse to develop a forecast of EV adoption, load, and peaks as part of our overall system demand forecast. And I'd like to just take a few minutes to provide some context for the information that Will's providing to us today. At the upcoming July 29th RPAG meeting, my team is going to be presenting the overall system electric and gas demand forecasts that are inputs into the ISP. And spoiler alert, if you've been tracking this for the last few years, the major driver of electric load growth is from EV charging. So in the past, there's been a lot of interest from this group and others in this particular component of the load forecast. So ahead of the July 29th RPAG, we thought it would be useful to have this informational session with Guidehouse to walk us through the assumptions and results around the EVs specifically. The contents of Will's presentation today mainly focuses on the forecast before impacts of customer programs designed to mitigate peaks. And I'll just go into a little bit more detail as to why that is to hopefully answer some questions that may come up about why we do it that way. So the impacts of customer programs or overall demand side resources are determined through a separate analytical work stream from this work that Guidehouse provides us. The impacts from demand side resources are coming from the PSE program teams who've developed their plans for customer programs such as TOU rates, demand response, and so forth, using the conservation potential assessment that CADMIS conducts as their starting point. So it's through that work stream that we obtain the forecasted reduction in energy and peaks to ultimately include in the system demand forecast. So in July, we'll present the demand forecast both with and without impacts of the demand side resources so that you'll see at that time what the impact of the programs are during that presentation. So today, Will has a high-level illustration of what the peaks from EV charging could look like if managed, but just please know, as I've mentioned, that the actual impact of programs are provided by the customer teams and their work through CADMIS. So again, content today is focused on the forecast of adoption, energy, and peaks, mostly before load management. It's really intended to lay the groundwork for the results that you'll see in July, as well as future conversations about customer programs related to EVs. So with that, I will turn it over to Will from Guidehouse to get going on the content.
Thanks so much, Lauren. So we have a lot of information to cover and want to save as much time as I can for questions. So let's move on to the next slide. I think Lauren and Annie did a great job of setting the stage. So as you can see, there's a lot of content in this deck. What we're going to be focusing on is the executive summary. So we got about 12 slides in there. And then if time allows and if there's interest, we might flip back to some of the other slides which provide supporting information, technical details, model specifications, that sort of thing. But this is to say that if your question isn't answered in this part of the presentation, hopefully it's somewhere in these other slides. Next slide, please. And so we're going to talk about the executive summary and then one more. So there are a couple different aspects to this forecast that I want to go through. We have these different modules, and the first module looks at the number of vehicles that are within a particular area. And so that's plug-in hybrid vehicles, battery electric vehicles, internal combustion engine vehicles for different duties, light duty, medium duty, heavy duty. And then we have the infrastructure that is necessary to support those vehicles. And so that's infrastructure based off of different power levels, L2, which you're looking at 7 kilowatts up to 12 kilowatts, up to very, very powerful, megawatt charging for long haul trucking. And then that's just giving us an infrastructure count. So the number of ports based off of the power level to support those electric vehicles. And then kind of the third module that we have is load impact. So that is the energy that those vehicles need to power the trips that they take. So kind of those are the three main pieces. So load impacts both energy and demand. And then kind of the piece that Lauren was talking about was this managed charging, thinking about ways that we can shift the load around. One of the popular methods right now is through time of use rates. So we can talk a little bit about that, but know that the results that are going to go with the ISP are from a different group. So we've worked with them, make sure that we are aligned, but kind of those results will come from that other group. And so within each of these different modules, so adoption, infrastructure, load impacts, we have three different scenarios. So the aggressive scenario is where everything's humming along quickly. Electric vehicles are relatively cheap. There's lots of available infrastructure. People like them. There's also accommodative policies. The base scenario is our best guess for what the future will look like. That being said, as you may have recently witnessed, there's a lot of uncertainty right now. We still have to take our best guess and put some numbers on the paper for what we think that base scenario will be. The farther out you go, the more uncertainty there is. We feel more comfortable next couple of years than in 2050. And then the final scenario is a conservative scenario where all of that accommodative policy went away. Electric vehicles are expensive. People don't like them. And then what does that do to adoption, infrastructure, and load impacts? And then within the managed charging module, there are three different managed charging scenarios. The first one that we're going to be talking about here is unmanaged charging. So there are no time of use rates, no demand side management. Another one is business as usual, which is kind of what we expect the case to be, what the rates will be, the price responsiveness of EV adopters, that sort of thing. And the last one is a managed charging, which is a little bit more aggressive. So people are more responsive to prices, and there are more people that are on those time of use rates. So I'm going to stop there and see if there's a question about kind of the structure of the forecast itself. All right, then we will just continue on to the next slide, please. So Guidehouse has been working with PSE for many years to help develop their electric vehicle forecast, and it has changed over time. And you can see how those have changed from 2019 up to the current forecast. So initially, as electric vehicles were a little more nascent, we were just focusing on light-duty vehicles. As the data has become a little bit more prevalent, as medium and heavy-duty market has matured, we've been able to get better data around those types of vehicles. And we've also been updating the policy based off of the updating the forecast based off the policy landscape. So all this to say is that every year, the landscape can change fairly dramatically. You can just think of the difference between last year and this year, and that's changed the forecast. Also, based off of what's happening within the market, maybe fuel cell vehicles are suddenly looking like they might be the dominant design for long-haul trucking. That would change things. So there are lots of different factors to include whenever you're doing a forecast, especially with a technology that's changing quickly, a market that's changing quickly, and a policy landscape that's rapidly evolving. The most recent updates that we made is we looked at the Advanced Clean Trucks policy, which affects medium and heavy-duty trucks, and the Advanced Clean Cars 2 policy, which focuses on light-duty vehicles. And those were some particular focus areas for the FY25 forecast. So questions about how these forecasts have changed over time or the relationship Guidehouse has had with PSE regarding their EV forecast?
I had a quick question, Will.
Yeah.
This is JP Carvalho from Berkeley Lab. I'm just wondering, and I submitted this via email, if you folks have ever conducted a retrospective analysis on how your earlier forecast in 2019 and 2020 had panned out, both in units or saturation levels, as well as operation assumptions, policy assumptions, etc., that could inform your forecast in the present day.
Yeah, we do some backcasting to say like how accurate are we? And so it's a little tough because things change so quickly that kind of whenever you do the retrospective, the assumptions have to change because you might have this policy landscape or more vehicles could be available. We do that, but gosh, it can be a little challenging if things are evolving so quickly. Does that answer your question, Juan?
Is this something that you can share?
Oh, so I don't have that with me here. I can show you like what those retrospective like forecasts can look like, but I don't have it available today.
Again, yeah, if you can share it later, that'll be great.
Yeah.
Thanks.
All right. Anything else? Wonderful. Let's move on to the next slide, please. So right now we're going to look at the base case light duty adoption. So recall this is for these results are for the base scenario. And what this shows you is how both plug-in hybrids and battery electric vehicle adoption has changed within Washington state since 2011. And then I also included some policy impacts on the right. So you have the Advanced Clean Cars policy, which went from 2018 to 2025. So, you know, I think there's more to this policy than just this penalty. There are also credits, which are pretty complicated. We don't have to go into here. You know, we haven't really seen automakers be fined for not meeting these sales targets. But more importantly, the Advanced Clean Cars 2 policy, which will kick in next year, it has a penalty of about $20,000 per vehicle where OEMs aren't meeting these sales targets. So especially for light duty vehicles, there's a pretty big penalty for those automakers, so we included this policy in our forecast, and that policy had a pretty big impact on what sales would be, especially in the near term. I want to focus on a couple things with this kind of historical and 1 year forecast. Especially looking from 2020 up to 2024, we see pretty rapid growth. From 2023 to 2024, it was about 13%. You know, from 2020 to 2024, I think it's closer to 50% per year. And so the question becomes, what type of forecast are we going to see going forward? So you can see in the forecast, we're expecting pretty big sales in 2025 in Washington state. There's an open question of whether we're going to meet those sales. And so I think what we've seen right now is thus far through 2025, Washington state is up by about 25% on the first 4 months. So maybe not, it remains to be seen whether we'll be able to catch up that and make up that difference to meet the 2025 forecast. But that's the sort of numbers that we're looking at going forward, is kind of fairly rapid growth, which is largely influenced by some of these policies, especially the Advanced Clean Car 2 policy. And I also want to say this is a policy-driven forecast. The way it's structured is what policies are on the books. I know there's a lot of uncertainty around policy changes, but at some point, kind of this is the decision that was made, and this is what we're going with. So I'm going to stop here. I know there's a lot of information here. And see if there are any questions.
Thanks, Will. Any questions from folks?
Does the policy have any locational or demographic implications in the way it operates? I don't know many details about the policy itself, but is it, for example, a rebate that still imposes upfront costs, so it leads to certain demographics acquiring vehicles, and that means that the vehicles are located in certain parts of the system? Are there any further consequences beyond just the number of vehicles?
It's OEM specific. So the OEMs would need to sell a certain proportion of their vehicles would need to be zero emissions vehicles or plug-in hybrids. And so the way that those would be sold, it's less clear. You know, I think the automakers would need to have certain strategies to increase adoption across different demographics to meet these sales numbers. Maybe they would focus on specific segments, but I'm not privy to that particular part of the OEM strategy to meet these sales figures, these sales targets.
Got it. Thanks, Will. Another quick question is, have you compared this sort of last 5-year load growth with growth in other markets like California or some markets in the East Coast that have higher EV penetration? And is it, and I know it's policy dependent, but are the levels that you're projecting here consistent with what you've seen in other markets?
Yeah, California's a little farther ahead. California is probably the most mature market that's out there. I think Washington is right in line with some of the other ZEV states. So New York, Massachusetts, Oregon, some of those. It's in the vanguard, but not California, which is really, really moving things forward. All right. If there are any other questions, Annie, let me know. Otherwise,
Nope.
We can move to.
Nope, we're good to keep going. Thanks, Will.
All right. Okay, let's move to the next slide, please. So another question is how this forecast compares with other forecasts. Triangulation is good, especially if those other forecasts are using different methods. So, looking at NREL has a forecast as well as the Washington Department of Ecology. And you can see what those forecasts are for in the third column, and then kind of what they are within this F25 forecast. And you can see that we're pretty close with NREL's forecast. Washington Department of Ecology, we're a little bit higher in 2030, a little bit lower in 2035. All of these forecasts are policy influenced. And so this Advanced Clean Cars 2 policy is a really big lever that's driving these results. And I think that's an important thing to keep in mind. So that's just to say that our forecasts are aligning with some of these other ones, which is reassuring as a modeler. You don't want to have kind of wildly different results unless you feel very confident about them. All right, moving on to the next slide. So I think it's important to keep in mind that we don't just follow policies blindly. And so looking at the medium and heavy duty case, that brings it into sharp relief. So in addition, the Advanced Clean Cars 2 policy is focused on light duty vehicles. The Advanced Clean Trucks policy is focused on medium and heavy duty vehicles. And it also has penalties. A couple aspects about that. The penalty is higher than for light duty vehicles, but as a proportion of the overall vehicle cost, it's still not as big. So looking at a semi-truck or a school bus, that's several hundreds of thousands of dollars. Just this penalty is quite a bit lower. And so looking at these sales targets, we kind of in discussion with some other stakeholders and some other groups, we decided to move away from the Advanced Clean Cars, the Advanced Clean Trucks sales targets in general. And we could include the penalty, but not include and say automakers are going to meet this. And the reason why is you can look at historical sales from 2022 to 2023, and you can see that they're growing, kind of tripling every year, more or less. But what we would need to see in 2025 is more growth by more than an order of magnitude, which it seems unlikely. And so because of that, we decided that it didn't make sense to assume that the market would hit these sales targets for Advanced Clean Trucks. And so you can see in the little black box what the actual forecasted amount that we used in the the FY25 forecast. You can see it's about 1,000 in 2025, which is basically a tripling of what we saw in 2024. We are on track to hit that thus far in Washington. Remains to be seen whether 2025 continues to move at that pace. But just wanted to emphasize that this forecast isn't taking place kind of on its own. It is incorporating what's happening within the market, and we're trying to stay abreast of the latest policy changes.
Hey, well, we've got a question from Ezra.
Yeah, so it seems like when we looked at the previous slide, you look at that 2025 number, that seems pretty unrealistic given what's happened in 24. But you're going with that, but you're making a different decision with the MHD. Is that right? So your position is, as far as the forecast, we're going to meet that target in 25, even though the sales in the last year don't seem to support that.
So I think it's important to look at more than 1 year's worth of results. I think looking at 2023 to 2024, it didn't grow that much. If you look at 2020 to 2024, that trajectory is much stronger, closer to 50%, closer to what we would need. So it is an important question of whether we are going to see that sales growth from 2020 to 2024, or what we saw from 2023 to 2024. And that's just something that we're going to have to pay attention to about what happened in 2025 and whether we need to update these assumptions.
Okay, but the 2025 number is based on the policy target.
Mhm.
And okay, and the presumption that with that stiff penalty, somehow we're going to meet that.
Yeah, but it's also based off of the historical growth of the past 5 years, not just the previous year. I think if you just look at the previous year, I would be much more skeptical. And looking at other innovations that have innovation growth, you don't always see a smooth trajectory up. It is more stair step. And so if we are seeing a leveling off in 2025, I think that we would say, all right, this looks to be closer to a trend than maybe a one-off year. I think looking at things like solar panels, you see some pretty big jumps, and then also some years that are more level. And so the assumption that we're going with here is that looking at the historical sales trends, that we're expecting Washington to be able to meet these sales targets in 2025. I think that, proof is in the pudding. We'll see what it actually comes out being.
Thank you.
Mhm.
Thanks, Ezra. And then we have a question from Quinn.
Hi, Quinn Weber with the Washington UTC. So I'm curious about whether or not there are sort of predictive factors that you could use to figure out whether or not you would see like a jump or steady out in EV adoption.
It can be tough to say looking forward. Looking backwards, it's easy. The Model 3 was one of those things. The Model 3 was introduced and there was a huge jump. We didn't know that amount of market appetite would be there for that vehicle. I think looking at financial incentives have proven to be pretty effective. Also, some vehicles that unlock certain markets. So I think if we are able to, I think the medium and heavy duty market for delivery trucks is very interesting. It's very big. It is majority of the medium and heavy duty market. So if there was a vehicle that was able to complete all of the transportation requirements for those vehicles, I mean, Amazon's the easy one because they're all over the place, and they partner with Rivian. If they were to find the vehicle that was cheaper to buy and cheaper to use, and that could fulfill their requirements, I think you would see very fast growth. But kind of those factors have to align to see that sort of growth. For light duty vehicles, I think that there are some challenges for some populations that may be resistant to new technologies. And so I think that's more of an education issue. What I found is that people who drive electric vehicles really like them. The torque, you go from 0 to 100% immediately. That's not the case with an ICE vehicle. There was a very powerful bit of marketing that I saw, which had an electric Mini up against some high-powered sports car. And it had them in a race. And in the mile, the Mini lost. But in the first 30 yards, the Mini won because of that instant torque and the handling and the excitement and the acceleration. So just to drive, electric vehicles are more enjoyable. And if you can, there's a kind of an awareness and an education piece that has the potential to unlock some of these larger customer groups. I'm not sure if and when that will happen, but that's one of the things that I think could lead to a pretty big increase in growth, in addition to financial incentives, policy, that sort of thing. A bit of a rambling response. Did that answer your question, Quinn?
It did, thank you.
Okay.
Thanks. And hey, Will, I just wanted to give you a heads up as we keep moving. We're about a little over halfway through. I know you have quite a bit of content still to cover. Okay.
Okay.
Oh, and do we want to answer Juan's question in the chat real quick? I just saw that pop up. It says, are there any federal policy incentives that are considered here, either new ones or removing existing?
Federal policies? Was that federal or state?
Federal.
Yeah, so right now we use the federal policies that are on the books. So the IRA is a federal policy that's on the book, the infrastructure bill, the infrastructure associated with that. So this forecast includes all of the policies, both state and federal, that are on the books.
Thanks, Will.
Yep, so let's move on to the next slide and I will try to limit my asides. So here are some kind of a deeper dive into some of the results. Looking at the EV population, that's the first set of bar charts on the left. You can see we're expected to go from about 147, and this is in the up to 200 and over 2 million vehicles. And then the interesting thing here is that we see that light-duty vehicles are 98% of EVs that are adopted. And so medium and heavy duties are only 2%. However, if you look at the energy that are necessary, you see that medium and heavy duties are closer to a quarter of the energy that's required. And that's because they're bigger, they require bigger batteries, they drive farther, especially in the case of long-haul trucks, and their fuel efficiency is lower. And so you can see that in 2050, we are forecasting that PSE's service area will need 8.3 terawatt hours of energy. And then finally is the EV peak before losses. So this is from unmanaged charging. So this doesn't include time of use rates or any of those demand side management pieces. So we found that the weekday peak load associated with EV charging was between 7 and 8 p.m. And in 2050, that is about 1.5 gigawatts. And during this time, 7 and 8 p.m., we see that residential charging from light-duty vehicles is the primary driver for this demand. You also have some medium and heavy-duty depot charging. So that's where vehicles are coming back from either being driven out to work or wherever, and then are charging whenever they come home. I think there's some scope to shift that load, which is the focus of the managed charging piece, which Lauren discussed earlier. Questions here? So question, why does it include unmanaged charging? Because they want to include the managed charging piece as a separate work stream. So we give them the unmanaged charging and then they apply the managed charging assumptions there. So whenever PSE presents the ISP, it will include those managed charging results. Lauren or Kelly, one of you can correct me if I'm misspeaking there. But these results also have managed charging, but what they wanted to show here was unmanaged charging. So whenever you sent out the deck, there are other results that have managed charging in it. Okay, moving on to the next slide. We got about 15 minutes left. So in addition to the far-reaching impacts, there are also questions about the near-term energy impacts. And so within PSE's service area, what we're expecting is that kind of looking at 2024 and 2025, the energy impacts are going to go from 292 gigawatt hours up to 1.7 terawatt hours. And we still have a similar, the proportion of that impact coming from medium and heavy duty vehicles is expected to increase as that market matures and there are more of those vehicles on the road. And we see a similar growth in EV peak before losses, where you're looking at 75 megawatts up to 390 megawatts in 2030. So, we're looking at growth by 6 times to 5 times over the next 6-ish years. And so I think that is relevant for keeping these impacts in perspective of the near term.
Yeah,
Yes.
Juan, I see your hand up.
Yeah, quick question. What are the implied vehicles miles travel for the light duty vehicles in this short-term forecast?
So the vehicle miles traveled for light duty vehicles, we have passenger cars and trucks, and then they are broken apart. We have different values for different states. So I think, I think it's around 11,000 miles for vehicle miles traveled. I could get the exact numbers, but it's in that range.
All right, I was asking because there was research coming out of the Energy Institute that has in Berkeley that sort of analyzed actual vehicle acquisition, and it was showing that for relatively early adoption, like I think what is occurring here in the near term, the trend was the adopters were the ones that were traveling significantly fewer vehicles miles traveled than your average. So it sounds like 11,000 is a relatively large or average number, and they found that the actual vehicles miles traveled for EVs were like 6,000. And so you may want to double check if there are, for example, if there's any evidence for actual vehicles miles traveled for current adopters in the P service territory, and whether it's true that those are also correlated with low commuters, such that the assumptions behind energy consumption might be quite overestimated here, at least for LDVs.
Yeah, I think that's interesting. I also know that, like, looking at CEC's numbers and their VMT, that there's quite a bit of variety there. And so I don't want to go too far down that rabbit hole, but that's I think that even if the early adopters are buying that, I think there's a question of, by 2030, what's the proportion that are going to be early adopters? So I think it's an interesting area and something to keep track of. If you could send me that study, or I can find it, that would be interesting for me to look at. I'm talking with a bunch of California groups at the moment, and it'll be interesting for context there.
All right.
Okay, other questions about these near-term energy impacts?
I don't see any more in the chat and no hands raised, Will. See, I think you can
Okay.
keep going.
Yeah, I think Philip just responded to,
Yep.
about the managed charging bit. Okay, so moving on to the next slide. So here we have a load shape, and there are a couple things I want to draw your attention to here. So along the vertical axis, you can see the load in megawatts. And then along the horizontal axis, you can see the hour end, so hour of day, and this is specifically hour end. And then along the right, you can see the colors are associated. Yep, SUD stands for single unit dwelling. Most people are familiar with single family homes, but we don't assume that there are families living in those buildings. So it's kind of like a standalone residential building. And that's different than SUD shared, which is like a row house. So it's kind of where you're sharing a wall. Oftentimes SUD shared don't have their own dedicated parking spots, which is important for charging. And MUD stands for multi-unit dwellings, so apartment complexes. Thank you for the for the definitional piece. Looking along so another thing is that this is charging use cases, unmanaged charging in 2050 for the base scenario. And then you can see the various charging use cases along the right. And so there's a lot of them. It's important to keep in mind that a vehicle that's at a home might have multiple different charging use cases. It might charge some at home, it might charge some at work, it might charge some at a public station. And those all would occur at different times. And so that's one of the reasons why the charging varies. Couple things that I want to draw your attention to here is the workplace charging, which is in orange. It is expected to be a very big component of charging in the longer term, not in the short term. The reason why is due to the individuals who are adopting these vehicles and the charging they have available to them. So we assume that most of the people who are buying electric vehicles now, well, not we assume, most of the people who are buying electric vehicles now have access to dedicated public or private charging. So they go home and they plug their vehicle in. In the future, we've looked at the housing mix within Washington state, and we're expecting only about half the people will have that charging access. So those people are going to have to charge, but we're expecting that they'll have electric vehicles. So they're going to need to charge somewhere. And the assumption here is that they're going to be charging at work and at public stations. And so that's an interesting kind of thought exercise of where is charging electrified? Is it electrified at people's homes? Is it electrified at workplaces? And then how do people get access to that charging and when? And so I think this is a very interesting thing to look at as you're considering development and charging infrastructure in the future. Another thing I wanted to point out is the single unit dwelling in the evening. That's people that are coming home from work and are plugging in and charging then. Again, this is unmanaged. So within managed charging, we would see a lot of that pushed to the evening in that lighter green area of the chart. And then a couple other use cases that we've seen are market. So this is at public charging, and then at corridor. Sounds like someone can't hear me. I'll try to speak up a little bit. And then corridor charging, this is for long haul trucks that aren't going to be domiciled at depots, but are going to be, smoking the bandit type thing that are driving for weeks on end, and they're going to be charging along the interstate. And most of this charging is happening in the middle of the day. The outcome of workplace, single unit dwelling, corridor, and market is that it actually serves to flatten out the load shape, which is interesting. And something that we didn't think about going into it. But there's a lot going on here. We still have a couple more slides to get to, but are there questions about this slide?
Thanks, Will. And also I know we're kind of behind schedule, so just want to maybe encourage us to keep, if it's okay, if we could keep moving and then maybe hold questions till we get through the end of the slides, if that's okay.
Okay, yeah.
Thanks.
Yep. I think we got 2 more slides. If we can go to the next slide, please. Okay, so I won't dwell on this too much, but someone had a question about managed charging. And so you can see the impacts of managed charging here with the morning and evening peaks and how different price rates, so time of use rates, along with price responsiveness, shifts some of that load to different times of the day. It makes it a little bit peakier, but you would expect to see something similar to this with the work that Cadmus is doing. So just gives you an idea of how demand side management can influence charging. All right, next slide, please. So some of the trends that we're seeing, and this gets back to something that I think Ezra brought up. We saw a leveling of sales in 2024. And we're seeing there's some uncertainty in 2025 in the market and the policy landscape. And so at the same time, we have seen decades of investment, adoption, and growth for electric vehicles. And so we're kind of having these forces that are pushing against each other. So I think that some of the things that are headwinds are policy uncertainty and reversal, and some of the OEMs are projecting delays in this EV transition. At the same time, there's still a pretty strong set of favorable federal and state policies. And we've also seen a lot of investment in electric vehicles from OEMs, from associated infrastructure businesses, and from other stakeholders and supportive groups. So I think that there are bigger headwinds this year than what we saw last year. At the same time, I don't think that we should lose the forest for the trees and just get completely wrapped up in the policy uncertainty that we're seeing now. I think we also need to keep in mind that there's been a lot of capacity building, a lot of growth for electric vehicles, and I think that that will help push forward the adoption going forward. And I think that we're going to see how this all plays out the next couple of years. All right, moving on to the next slide. I think this is my last slide, so I got a couple minutes. So takeaways from this executive summary. We're seeing fairly strong growth within PSE service area, expecting it to grow 315 gigawatt hours per year out to 2050. As mentioned earlier, policy defined sales targets, specifically from the Advanced Clean Cars 2 policy, is having a very big impact. As the policy landscape shifts, if there are changes there, or if it looks like the market isn't keeping up, I think there'll need to be adjustments made to the forecast. But right now, we're kind of looking at the forecast continuing to grow fairly rapidly over the next couple of years. That being said, there are significant downside risks in the short term and long term EV adoption. In the short term, this policy uncertainty. In the long term, we just are not sure how vehicles will be used or what types of vehicles will be used. It's possible that fuel cell vehicles may turn out to be the dominant design for long haul trucking, and that would have a big impact on the load. So I think that those risks need to be kept in mind. There's a lot of uncertainty within this forecast, especially around policy in the short term, and then around the vehicle mix in the long term and how they're going to be used. There's some uncertainty around light duty vehicle forecast and home charging. We are assuming that a large portion of homes won't have access to dedicated charging. It could turn out that there's a big policy push and then they try to electrify all homes and all parking spots. That would change things dramatically. I think that there are some equity issues there as well in terms of who would have access to it or not. But if everyone was able to charge when they got home from work, it would push a lot of the load from the middle of the day to the end of the day, and that could exacerbate peaks. That's something we're going to need to look at in terms of where people what charging is available to individuals who own electric vehicles, especially non-business individuals. And then finally, there's some uncertainty regarding medium and heavy duty forecasts and unknown market behavior. This goes to, it's an early market. We're not sure what vehicles are going to be used. We're not sure how they're going to be used. And as successful business models emerge, we should have a better idea about what that will look like in the future. But there's still some uncertainty, especially around the medium and heavy duty vehicle market. I think that is it. You can go to the next slide. Right. I think
that's the end of the executive summary. Yeah. Thanks, Will.
Yeah.
All right. Great timing. So thank you so much for that overview of the executive summary. As you may have guessed, the rest of the slides from Guidehouse are really there for supporting materials. And then wanted to pause. We have just a few minutes for questions or comments from the RPAG members before we move into next steps and public comment. So wanted to see if there's a few questions people have. Okay. Give you just a few more seconds. Okay, well, looks like we got some questions from folks, and I know we have at least one action item. I noted for you, Will, we were going to share the retrospective forecasts with RPAG members, so maybe we can coordinate that with you and Meredith after today as we send any follow-up items, if that's okay. Okay. And then it looks like, okay, we do have 4 public commenters today, so that's quite a few. So we'll go ahead and keep moving into our next step. So Jack, if you don't mind going all the way down to slide 61. Oh, we've got 5 folks. Okay, so we are going to have to go a little bit over for public commenters today. Just RPAG members, if you do have to hop off, that's okay. We'd love for you to stay and continue listening to public commenters, but also understand that we're going to have to go over a bit. So slide 61 should say next steps on it. And then, yeah, perfect. And then you can go actually to the next one, because what I'm going to cover is just some upcoming dates that folks should be aware of. So looking ahead, we have a couple of dates. So next week, the 24th, is the regular monthly RPAG meeting. So today was a kind of an offshoot of information center or information session for you all. Next week is the regular monthly meeting. And then June 25th is the feedback deadline. So for this meeting, that closes on the 25th. And then July 29th is slotted for next month's regular monthly meeting. Okay, next slide. If there is anything that comes up between now and then, questions, feedback, clarification, please feel free to email PSE using that email address or the feedback form. There's a voicemail, there's an email subscribe list, and there's a website. So we'll go ahead and copy and paste that into the chat, Ben, if you don't mind doing that. And then just want to check real quick before we move into public comment if there's any last items from the RPAG members. Okay, great. So I will go in the order that I see. So I'll have David Nightingale first, then Don Marsh, then Bradley Nelson, Tom Kramer, and then Brian Grunkemeyer. Okay. So I will give some instructions in just a moment, if you give me a minute. Okay, so let's go to the next slide. So we're going to shift now to the public comment portion of today's meeting. If you're a member of the public and you want to speak, we have already tried to get you to raise your hand. We have 5 folks. If I didn't say your name and you'd like to share public comment, please go ahead and raise your hand now. As I mentioned, I think you can go to the next slide, Jack. Perfect. As I mentioned, each speaker will have approximately 3 minutes, and I will share a timer, a visual timer on the screen so the public commenter can see it, so RPAG members that are on screen can see it. And as usual, I'll keep you on track. I'll give you a 30-second warning before we wrap you up at 3 minutes. We ask that the comments stay respectful and focus on today's topics. This isn't a Q&A, but your input is going to be captured in the PSE written feedback summary. And if you run short on your 3 minutes in terms of time, please go ahead and submit your thoughts in writing. You're always welcome to send them to the PSE email address. Again, that's in the chat, and submit them via the feedback form. Okay, so thanks in advance for sharing your perspectives. And let me go ahead and share my screen with the timer. So just give me one moment. Jack, I'll steal the screen sharing from you if that's okay. Okay, great. And have we promoted the public commenters up to panelists yet? Ben, I'm not sure if you can hear me.
Not yet, but I can press the allow to talk.
Okay, that sounds good. So we'll go with David first. And then David, I'll go ahead and start. David, you want to just test your audio, make sure it's working?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yep, perfect. I'll go ahead and start your time.
Okay, great. Just 2 quick things. One is that when you get to the managed charge part, with hundreds of thousands of EVs in PSE's territory, that essentially is a huge battery resource for supplementing generation during peak times. That is an absolute huge thing. And manufacturers of EVs are more and more the trend towards having bidirectional charging to provide those electrons back into the system. The Cybertruck, F-150 Ford Lightning, all the Hyundai vehicles and other manufacturers are planning in the next years to provide bidirectional charging. It's going to be a huge resource. And in order to keep my rates and everybody else's down, that's going to be a pretty cheap way to get energy. There's technological problems that have to be overcome and systems, but it's a resource that should not be ignored. The other thing is just it's a little bit of a tweak, and that is that my understanding is the current tariff system that PSE has does not allow time of use if you have solar panels on your house. And so there's the people out there that have EVs that would be happy to not charge them during peak times with the time of use, but they're disallowed right now because they have solar panels on their houses. And I'd like to see that remedied. Thank you very much.
Thank you, David. Okay, next up I have Dawn, and then Bradley will be after that. Dawn, do you want to take yourself off mute so we can test your audio before I start your time?
There, can you hear me?
We can hear you. Okay, great, Dawn, your time has started.
Great. I'm Don Marsh, representing the Washington Clean Energy Coalition. And I think I can save a lot of time by just enthusiastically seconding what David Nightingale just said. I'm making as a criteria for my next EV, it has to have at least V2H, if not V2G. And there are a lot of car manufacturers that are offering that either now or will be in the next year or two. So again, I want to see when we get to the managed charging part of the ISP, I want to see a lot of detail on what PSE is thinking that can contribute to both peak demand or emergency scenarios. Seems like a very good resource to take advantage of. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Dawn. Okay, next up I have Bradley, and then I have Tom on deck after that. Bradley, do you want to test your audio to make sure we can hear you?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. Okay, I'll go ahead and start your time.
Yeah, I did want to clarify. I am not a member of the public. I'm with Burns McDonnell Engineering Firm. I was not able to submit any questions. The chat was disabled. So if I don't count, happy to give over my time. Otherwise, I do have a few comments, less questions.
Bradley, you can go ahead and state your questions. This isn't going to be an open Q&A, so they'll get responded to in the
great.
feedback report, though.
All right, great. So overall, just based on the experience that we've had, I'm concerned with a lot of the assumptions that were included in the EV projections, primarily around using the base case being meeting the ACC2 EV sales recommendations. I do see that ACT, they at least assumed not meeting those EV sales requirements. No state is currently on track to meeting the 2026 EV sales requirements. And so I think using that as the baseline instead of the most aggressive case could create some potential issues as far as what you're assuming as far as the EV sales growth going forward. So that might be something to just consider when you do for future projections. Additionally, I think when you had some of the workplace assumptions around load impacts, we are seeing very slow uptake in a lot of workplaces for those workplace charging. And so assuming that that will automatically flatten out the load, I think is potentially overly optimistic. We're just having a lot of challenges even seeing workplaces adopt those sort of systems. So I think overall, those are the main two concerns just with the EV adoption growth rates and workplace charging going forward as far as how that will in fact actually impact some of these load growth scenarios. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Bradley, for those comments. Okay, I have Tom up next, and then we'll wrap up with Brian. So, Tom, could you take yourself off mute just to test your audio?
Yes, can you hear me?
We can hear you. I'll go ahead and start your time, Tom.
Okay. Well, first, I'd like to say that I appreciated the presentation by Guidehouse. It was great at elaborating the most important points instead of trying to make sure that they got to everything. I, however, was also disappointed that you did not mention the potential for vehicle-to-grid programs. They have the potential to offset a good deal of the energy loads that EVs create. Vehicle batteries have a potential storage capacity that will be enormous as the number of EVs increases. And this storage could provide significant load shifting potential, reducing the need for new peaking plants. And battery storage has proven effective in frequency and voltage stabilization for the system as well. In addition, batteries would be widely distributed over the utility's service area. This distributed energy resource can help minimize the need for new distribution and transmission capacity as electrification loads increase. Several large utilities have vehicle-to-grid pilot programs underway now, including Pacific Gas and Electric and San Diego Gas and Electric, among others across the country. I would like to see PSE among those leaders. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Tom. Okay, and we are going to wrap up with Brian. Brian, can you speak up so we can test your audio? Brian, are you there?
Yes, hello.
Oh, there you are. We can hear you now. Okay,
Yes,
I'll go ahead and start your time.
uh, I'm Brian Grunkemeyer, founder and CTO at Flex Energy, a virtual power plant provider. Um, I want to mention some stuff on industry trends I've noticed. On the V2G side, for residential, it's not ready yet, but you should be piloting something in about 6 to 12 months. But until then, everything's held up with UL certification and stuff like that, so it's not ready. However, school buses are ready now, and it would be a shame if you guys weren't already piloting that. But I want to move on to how you're going to value the managed charging that is modeled here in the Guidehouse forecasts. Um, I've chatted with utilities all across the world to an extent on this, and the range of values is off the charts. In California, if you talk to a CCA, a retail energy marketer effectively, the value is $26 per car per year. I have three paying utility customers that tell me the value is between $1,100 and $1,800 per car per year. And that 60x spread in value is just off the charts. It's really hard to deal with that, but it comes down to how the utility pays for power. And in all of these cases, we're completely ignoring the distribution grid impacts. Argonne National Labs came out with a report showing that the distribution grid impact could be up to $300 per car per year in deferred or avoided upgrade costs for transformers. We're doing similar stuff with Vermont Electric Co-op and the Republic of Ireland. And I think there's a lot of opportunity there, especially since Philip has mentioned in the past he's got constraints around Duval. And maybe there's ways to help out. But if there's any way to for you to include in the next set of presentations, whether you value reduced load on, say, a 5-hour window, a 2-hour window, or a 30-minute window, that will provide a lot of insight to figuring out how to properly value this. And the shorter the time period, the higher the value. I'm happy to share more thoughts or math on this with your team as needed. Thank you.
Thanks, Brian. All right. That gets us through our public commenting portion. Thank you all for helping us stay within the time limits and being respectful and courteous. Appreciate that. Now we're going to go ahead and move into wrap up. So just want to thank again everyone for being here today. Special thanks to Guidehouse for providing the presentation. We will be following up with materials, and please, 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 we have a short Zoom poll at the end when you exit out of this meeting. It's only 3 questions. It should take less than 30 seconds. Our PEG members, we'd really appreciate you completing it just so we can make sure that these meetings are as useful to you as possible. And we'll look forward to seeing you at our next RPAG meeting next week. Thanks, everyone. Have a great rest of your day.